are the possible pollutants from chemical fertilizers, and what are their effects on the environment?
The main things with fertilizer that we're going to be concerned about are nitrogen and phosphorus. And the issue with both is that you get enrichment in the environment that leads to undesired plant growth. That's the primary issue with both. Some systems are more prone to contamination by nitrogen, and so they're nitrogen limited, and if you add more nitrogen, you get more plant growth. Typically those are marine systems or estuarine systems. Most freshwater systems are phosphorus limited, so in those cases if you add extra phosphorus, then you can get extra plant growth. And plants are good, but the issue is that if you have excessive plant growth, that can result in, eventually if the plants are algae, they can die off, and when they die off they get decomposed by bacteria, and those bacteria pull oxygen out of the water during decomposition. So they end up promoting loss of oxygen, and ultimately that can be a hazardous situation where you end up with fish kills, loss of habitat, and what are termed dead zones. So those are the predominant issues associated with chemical fertilizer application.
Okay. And what role do chemical fertilizers play in the current state of health in the Chesapeake Bay?
In the Chesapeake, both nitrogen and phosphorus are nutrients that can enrich plant growth. So both of those are limiting nutrients in there. Depending somewhat on season and location, either one of those can enrich the nutrient burden in there. And the Chesapeake is subject to nutrient over-enrichment and periodic dead zones. So every summer there are dead zones in the bay. It's a matter of how big they are and how long they last. And those dead zones can result in fish kills where you might get literally millions of fish floating in an area of the bay that has become deprived of oxygen. So it's largely the primary driver for water quality in the Chesapeake. Things like pesticides and toxic metals and things like that are very much secondary to the role that fertilizer enrichment plays in the Chesapeake.
Okay. Are there some fertilizers that are less threatening to the environment or specifically to the Chesapeake Bay? And if so, what are they?
So some of it is a matter of how the fertilizer is applied, and some of it's a matter of what's in the material itself that comprises the fertilizer. There are organic fertilizers where the nitrogen and phosphorus are part of larger organic molecules, and these can include things like compost, in some cases manures. And in some cases those are a little bit less harmful because the nutrients they contain are released slowly over time, whereas the nutrient content of some inorganic fertilizers, which might be what you're saying with chemical fertilizers, the inorganic fertilizers in some cases are very highly soluble. So every time it rains, you've got a greater probability of having those nutrients removed with rainwater and getting into streams and washing into the bay. So to some extent it's a matter of how they're applied, how often they're applied, and whether they're applied according to regulation, or not regulations, but maybe recommendations for use for a particular crop. But in some cases the actual type of fertilizer that's applied can decrease the amount that ends up getting leached out into runoff water.
Okay. And what are some of the economic benefits to using chemical fertilizers, and do they, in your opinion, do they outweigh the environmental costs?
Well, the benefit to the farmer is that you get increased yield. So for a given amount of land, you can produce a greater quantity of crop, which can potentially lead to more of an economic advantage for the farmer. On the downside, the use of fertilizers is itself an expense, so the farmer has to pay that expense to achieve that higher yield. And then there's the economic cost in terms of environmental issues. So there is certainly an economic cost associated with decreased habitat quality in the Chesapeake Bay. So for recreational use of the bay, as well as commercial use of the bay for fisheries, having that declining water quality can make a significant economic impact. What that balance is, I don't really know. I think if fertilizers are well managed and well applied, then you can get a situation where they provide economic impact benefit for the farmers, but may not necessarily result in an unsustainable amount of contamination in the Chesapeake. So it really is a balance as to how well they're used, if you can manage to get that cost-benefit ratio ultimately in the positive side.
Okay. Do you believe that it is possible to eliminate fertilizers completely? And is there any other alternative to using them that produces the same economic benefits?
As far as alternatives, it's a matter of plant chemistry. The plants require nitrogen and phosphorus, so eliminating them entirely, or in the sense of finding an alternative, is not really possible. You need supplements of nitrogen and phosphorus. Use of a given plot of land year after year is going to deplete those materials out of the soil very quickly, so they need to be replenished. So you can't really eliminate fertilizer use at all. Like we were saying earlier, alternatives are possible in the sense that there are different materials, some of which allow for slower release of the nutrients and more efficient uptake. That's probably where the biggest opportunity is to try and get efficient uptake of those nutrients by the plants. That's a benefit for the farmer, because that means that less of what they're paying for ends up going off as waste in stormwater. And it's also a benefit environmentally, because you then have less off-site impact that's potentially going to cause damage to the bay.
I know you mentioned the method in which it's applied and such like that, but are there anything that farmers could be required to do that would lessen the amount, other than how they apply it, that would lessen the amount that runs off?
Well, one practice that has been used is taking particular parts of their property out of production. So areas that border streams and rivers and lakes, if you can take a buffer zone out of production and allow that to revegetate, have some natural vegetation there, there is the possibility that that land can serve as a filter. And so by not plowing and farming right up to the edge of the water, you maintain a portion of landscape that can naturally assimilate those nutrients and prevent them getting into the water. There is certainly a cost associated with that, because whatever land is being conserved for a filter is not being planted and doesn't provide any profit for the farmer. And that's been an issue lately, because with some of the current cutbacks in federal funds, money that would have supported those farmers to maintain those vegetated filter strips is not as readily available. And so farmers are putting some of that land back into production right now, and where we might have seen improvements previously because of the filtration that those areas provide, some of that benefit may be lost if we cannot support that with programs that are designed to keep that land providing a different benefit other than food production.
The last question is, what kind of policies or changes in policies, you mentioned the funding and such, would you like to see go into effect to lessen the effect of fertilizers?
I think one thing that I've heard about, I'm not sure if it's used universally, but a requirement for fertilizer management plans. I think farmers have a vested interest in being able to apply nutrients efficiently. But I think that the presence of a management plan where they indicate how they're going to apply the fertilizers, what materials they're going to use, what the timing is going to be, and allowing for some input by people who are working for state extension agencies, for example. I think making that system more robust and more widespread would be an advantage, so that farmers can get the benefit of these materials to improve the yields of their crops, and environmentally we can get the benefit of minimizing off-site transport. That's really what it's about, is minimizing the amount of these materials that either gets into groundwater or moves off in stormwater and gets into surface environments.